Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate prose. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. Here we go, live, session 79 officially. It's been a little hiatus, couple weeks since we had a live guest on here, timing and scheduling and all the things going on, but an amazing guest this evening. Before we get to Mike Stroh's bio and into the conversation, thank you everybody who's been downloading and paying attention to this platform. It continues to grow, it continues to evolve, and to all the guests that are making time to be on here and everybody who's making time to listen to this, it goes such a long way having the opportunity to connect, to get connected, and to continue to learn, to grow, and to connect with new people, with old faces and familiar faces and not so familiar faces as we move forward in various realms of the sports space, of the performance space. So as mentioned, session 79 is always brought to you by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, Benchmark Athletics, and in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. Mike Stroh is our guest this evening. He is the founder of Starts With Me, a consultancy specializing in K-12 education and workplace mental health. Starts With Me helps to create mentally healthy teams that are connected, effective, and purpose-driven. Over the years, he's worked with some of the world's biggest brands like Amazon, Hyundai, Arc'teryx, the City of Toronto, and Canada's largest school boards. He was part of a team in 2019, an innovative team, Exemplary Practice Award in Mental Health and Student Leadership from the TCDSB, and Arc'teryx, chose him as one of their Toronto global problem solvers for his use of design thinking to solve complex social issues. Mike's been featured in different national news broadcasts discussing a variety of mental health and addiction-related topics. Through live events, presentations, and workshops, Starts With Me is presented to over 100,000 people and launched the first ever Mental Health Innovation Festival, State of Mind. Its fourth year ran back in May, and it was amazing to be a part of. I'd love to touch on that because I think that was an absolutely fantastic experience on our end from the sports space and crossing those paths and connecting again. Mike, I was reflecting on our time and a lot of the overlap that we've had. And in the past sort of year to 18 months, we did a mental health and addiction seminar in the sports space on here in alignment with Jens Kasten back in October. In May, you invited myself and some athletes to come as part of the State of Mind Festival. And obviously the founder of some amazing things, the creator of some amazing things, a friend, a colleague, and registered psychotherapist, an amazing sort of feat of things that have come all the way around. So I've talked a lot to introduce you. I've said a lot of words, but really appreciate you, man, as always, inviting me into your world, inviting us into your world, and being a part of ours as well. Thank you for being here, and let's just say hello and let's ride this thing and see where we go.
Sure, thanks. And I always listening to sort of my life's work being read as a bio is always kind of a bit of a trip, but yeah, here we are. I think it's also important to note how far back, we haven't been all that close back over the years, but we've known each other for a long time and we have very similar close friends. And I always think that's pretty remarkable how worlds collide or come together and all that stuff. So I'm always reminded of that. A lot of this stuff is a life journey. And so here we are, I don't know. I'm a human being just, trying to do my best every day and be of service where I can. So that's what I'm up to right now.
I think it's amazing work, just in acknowledging that and the humility in that. And I think that that's the piece that I have sort of come to realize of late in the therapy space, in the sports space. It seems to be coming to light more and more with some issues now through the pandemic, and then athletes coping and getting banned from the Olympics for smoking dope as a sprinter, in dealing with personal things. A lot of these quote unquote issues, the mental health thing, always has been there, but it's being sort of allowed, quote unquote, to surface these days. What's your sort of take on that? I mean, obviously that's a good thing, but is that because we've been we know more now, we've acknowledged the importance of it? Is it because of the pandemic where a lot of people have had to turn introspective? Is that part of it? I mean, wherever you want to take that question.
Yeah, I think there's a few things happening. I'd say one, as human beings, we evolve. So there's this sort of just this process of our evolving self-awareness, collective consciousness, which I think is part of that piece. And I'd say I don't know the depths and the accuracy of all this, but there's definitely also a piece that literally for our whole history, we've been at war and killing each other. And I mean, that was the history of human civilization. So after World War II, that has slowed down tremendously. And so I think a lot of our common societal international problems are no longer about global conflict and large scale war. So that's the background, in my opinion. There's a lot of that going on in the background, which then leads to higher order needs being met, or more self-actualizing needs being met, rather than safety and security and that kind of thing. So I do think that's important, and that's often kind of just not in people's awareness how lucky we are in that sense. So I'd say that piece is definitely happening. And I'd also say the internet and just the vast spread of information, people have access to more things to be aware about. There seems to be something with the dissemination of news. So the main places we got our news from are disintegrating, and there's so many other places where information gets out. So maybe that has part to do with it.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and the last, just like I think we're just becoming a more aware of our suffering, and the more people that become aware of it, the more conversations happen, therefore more things come out.
Yeah, and this is a beautiful piece. It's that I think we could probably spend the entire session talking about, is sort of this realization of self, or this understanding of who I am allows me to understand and see more in others, or see myself in others, or see them in me. That suffering piece is not something that escapes athletes just because they're either making a lot of money or in the media and these kinds of things. Naomi Osaka on the tennis tour, right, spoke up and left sort of the tennis tour because of her mental health and wanted to spend time with family. And I don't know her personally, nor do I know her story, but again, we're disseminating information through the media and how it's presented. And again, trying to navigate that is always difficult too. But then, the most recent one, and I didn't mean to make light of sort of being banned for quote unquote smoking dope, I think is what I said at the beginning, but Sha'Carri Richardson knowingly smoked marijuana, knows that that's an illegal substance, made a choice and came out and flat out said, I made the choice. I knew I wasn't allowed to do it. I was dealing with things. And I think if we can tie it back around to the State of Mind festival that you've run, and again, it was its 4th year this year, back in May, and I'm sure some of those recordings will be made available in the future for those that didn't attend, but some really amazing attendees, and the athletes that we had on, the angle that we took together with your lead was exposing the athlete under the jersey. The human underneath the jersey is still a human. And I think a lot of the times, even working in the sports industry, we forget that it's almost roboticized. It's almost mechanized to the point of this is a consumer driven product. This is, you know, something that is monetized and something that's driven for entertainment, and it's different than sort of the gladiatorial things at the beginning of of time in the sports space, I guess. But seeing the human underneath that, and I know you have played sports, you've worked with some athletes, you've worked with human beings. So is there a piece here that we've just been naive to in the sports space, and it's just like, wake up, like they're humans, what's so hard to understand? Or, you know, what's your take on that, sort of from the outside looking in? I know you don't have any direct affiliation to any pro sports teams or leagues at this point in time, but what's your take on sort of on that outlook, right? Like that commoditization, I guess, of human beings and what that does to the treatment of and rectifying and dealing with some of these issues.
Sure. I'm going to try to piece together a few different ideas. So
Yeah. It just puts you right on the grill. Got really, really serious really fast. Take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, no, it's good because I mean it's complicated, of course, right? Nothing is really straightforward. But okay, I would. Someone's knocking at the door. Hello, hello. I'm busy.
Yeah, good nighttime. All right. Hey, welcome.
Okay. Hey, there you go. Okay, so with that historical context of us as animals and we're growing and evolving and etc., there's an incredible book called The Master and His Emissary. It's from a really well-known psychiatrist, neuroscientist, whatever, etc. And his argument is like our left brain linear thinking is so obsessed with 1+1=2. Like I have to have a start and a finish. I need to have control, and if I don't have control, and if I it starts to and I'm not doing justice to the argument, but and then the right hemisphere, and this is proven through like all kinds of neuroscience and stuff, is much more wise, you could say, is much more aware of our higher order needs. And in our current world, the left brain is so dominant, which is why we can create, which is why we have this technology to have this conversation right now. But that starts to become psychopathic in some sense, right? Or there's like a pathology to that way of thinking. And you see it in our business. And I'm going to pause there too, because part of that's important, right? Like we often want to just brush aside the fact that we're so obsessed with outcomes and performance and numbers and achieving goals. And that is really important. And so how do we balance that with the need to look at the human being? And maybe that's out of balance right now. But so there is that piece of like this obsessiveness on just outcomes, controlling things, quantifying. And then sometimes that gets out of whack, and we get reminded, usually through pain and suffering, that we need balance. And so maybe there's a bit of an awakening happening there. Perhaps I've read things about and the sport. I think athletes we're all in sort of complicit in this, just that drive to be the best and to perform and to achieve. It's a quality in humans, but it also can be unhelpful. So I don't know, I see that going on a lot, and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and everyone's caught up in the wheel, and so you can't. How do you jump off the wheel without letting go of the pursuit? I think is such a difficult question to answer, but I think there's examples of people doing that. I always, my role model in this sense is always George Mumford, who figured out a way to speak to athletes at the highest level, obviously the Bulls and the Lakers, and he's worked with athletes all over the place. But there's a way to, I don't know, expand our interpretation of what it means to be an athlete, and also what it means to be a person, and then who knows. So anyway, that's sort of my attempt to parse together this sort of evolutionary psychology and neuroscience with like what's happening right now for people in the world.
Yeah, and I don't mean to put you on the spot or turn to you
Mhm.
for all of the answers for all of our listeners, but I always
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's an amazing take from that side of sort of stepping back and having the space to sort of acknowledge all of those pieces, and to not have the answer, but have, you know, some semblance of this is what might be happening based on all that's going on.
Yeah,
You talk,
actually,
you,
I want to interrupt you
yeah,
because I want to ask
yeah,
you a question.
sure.
In that sense, because this is where I think I grapple with this all the time. We know all this stuff. We know where room can be made to increase the well-being of athletes
Mhm.
psychologically. And yet there's still it's game 4 of the Stanley Cup Finals, and we need to walk out of this dressing room and perform. And whether that's I'm going to take a painkiller or I'm going to take a whatever it is I need to get me out of this locker room right now, I'm going to take it. I don't give a shit what, you know, whatever. So I guess my question is, how do we start meeting athletes where they're at in those intense moments? And do they just get sent out, or is there a way to, how does that situation get
Mm,
addressed? And I know I flipped it on you a bit there,
yeah,
but
no,
that's
I
where
think,
this, it's hard, right? It's really
yeah.
hard.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. It's a question not only for myself, but for all of our audience members that are part of this space. Whether that's as, you know, a fan, or that's as a practitioner behind the bench, or your sister's playing professionally, or whatever the case may be, whatever that involvement is, it's an interesting thing to ponder. And again, I don't profess to have the answers, but again, the pieces of it need to be considered, right? Under contract, what does that mean? What does a professional status mean? Making this much money, what does it mean to perform? What other factors are coming behind that? Does that make it right? Does that make it wrong? All of these pieces. And we talked back in October on that mental health seminar and addiction, and we sort of touched on some of these points very briefly. And I think this one definitely deserves to be sort of unveiled and unmasked. How do we address it, and how do we meet athletes where they're at? This is the question, I think, that separates practitioners from just being part of that wheel. Because when we can connect with the human that's not the athlete, take the athlete out of the equation, and start to make um, decisions or discussion or education that matters to that human being, regardless of sport, then I think we begin to change the dialogue in locker rooms towards, you know, playing through pain, or playing with painkillers, or what's the worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario, what's going to come of this. It's not an easy one to navigate, because there is, you know, so much on the line. And like you said, that's historical. Go back to the time of gladiatorial sports, which is where sports really started, was kill or be killed. And that mentality is humanistic, right? I think, which you would address, like that's in us through evolution. That is still a part of who and what we are. And again, we could dive in even deeper and look at that as like an ego thing. And like, if I don't go on the ice, I'm seen as less or not qualified, or I didn't give my best, or I didn't do these other things. And where does that leave me? And then you're looking at external validation, and like all of these pieces that you're much more well versed than I am. But I combat this on a regular basis, and sort of, how far do we take this conversation? How do we get into those channels? And I think it's bringing people in from the psychotherapy world, and having people that can understand this is going to continue to happen. People are going to mask symptoms of injury, or just blatantly ignore them and continue to play through to win at all costs. But at the same time, the conversations are now happening, and it's also being reflected in lawsuits, right? Like, where people are saying, nobody ever told me about this, or I didn't know enough about this when it happened, or whatever the cases might be. And again, I don't think I really answered anything, but I just think there are so many moving parts to that, but we're sort of up to the precipice of having the conversation. And now it's like, what's the change? Like, what is actually going to be implementable and actionable at this point? And I think you and I have had long dialogue on this in the past and leading up to that festival as well. Let's talk is great, and let's chant for mental health, definitely, and allow that to get there. But once we get there, what are we doing with it? Because there's not a lot of accessible service to athletes in those spaces. Come back around to Brady and where that seminar started back in October, a guy who was definitely at one end of the spectrum, certainly, and an outlier when it comes to the extreme nature of his story. But no resources available, nowhere to turn. And once your contract gets terminated, like, what do you have? And there's a lot of athletes that go through the end of their contract or suspended from playing or COVID and no season. And there's the identity piece that's lost as well. And I think I've now navigated away from your question into a whole bunch of different waters. But I mean, I would bounce that back to you and anybody who's listening as well, to sort of just bat that one around in your head and start having dialogue with people that are in the space as well. It's like, are we willing to have these conversations, and where are we willing to go? Not necessarily to have the answers, but to have the conversations on how do we arrive at an answer? How do we arrive at a conversation that everybody can still play in the sandbox together, and you're not out the door because you said that thing that you weren't supposed to say, right? One way or the other. Because again, it's a bit of a dog eat dog world sometimes in the pro spaces, right? So but I do want to come back, and sorry for skirting that and for the long-winded sort of, I think I was quite literally thinking out loud. The piece of identity as an athlete, that's not uncommon to human beings in general. Like, we can just sort of, is that fair to say, like, we could just plug athlete in, or we can plug dad in, or mom in, or stockbroker or whatever, and this is how we identify, although it's just a role, right? I mean, it's a role that we play, but it doesn't necessarily define us, but we spend so much time doing it that essentially it becomes us. Is that I don't know, that's a thing that I wrestle with on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'd say, well, as we all have multiple identities, of course, that we're acting out in the world in different relationships with different people. And I think an important idea too with identities is that well, ideally they're in relationship with other people. So if my kids don't think I'm their dad, or they don't want to act as if I'm their dad in any given moment, then technically in that moment, I'm not really their dad. In the moment, of course. But in terms of an athlete, I think to me, it's all about thoughts and perceptions and memories and images and et cetera. So if I'm driving around in my car and I'm so and so from this team in this league and this status, then I perceive my interactions through that status. And then other people, and this is where the identity and relationships happen, speak to me as if I'm that conglomerate of ideas and thoughts and images and memories and et cetera. So they're not actually, we're never really, well, I shouldn't say that. Most often, we're never in relationship with the actual person. There's a great saying, I am who I think you think I am. Right. So if I'm, and that's how we kind of all wander around the world. And of course, with athletes, it's hard, obviously. And if we can, this stuff has been discussed for millennia and will be, obviously. So, who are we? What are we? All that kind of stuff plays into this in some sense. But I think going back to the practical, meeting athletes where they're at in the moment, if I'm the manager of a team or the coach and I think, okay, we need to practice 10 hours a week, whatever it is. And if it's my opinion, the more hours we have, the better, the more reps, the more this, the more shots, the more throws, the more, that's that hyper yang kind of forward energy, like we just must perform and compete, da 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 da.
Hmm.
So I don't see how it's, I don't see, I don't even know how to say this. If we took those 10 hours every week and we just started implementing 30 minutes of reflection or an hour, or, and that's what Phil Jackson did with the Bulls, right?
Yep.
It wasn't extra work. It was, we're going to do this instead of shooting extra shots or whatever it is. And so I don't know how you, again, it's so hard for one individual to practice this stuff consistently over time. So
Yep.
I think there's also a gap between what we expect is reasonable and possible to what's actually happening on the ground. And any tiny step in that direction is ideal. So I don't know. I'm also kind of talking not in a direct answer, but those are all the pieces that I think of when I see. So there's the identity of who I am, what I think I am, and mindfulness is usually the most effective way to start observing how obsessively trapped we are in our thoughts and our perceptions of who we are and who other people are. And then there's the practical side of how do we just start giving people tastes of that more frequently in their daily life, or if it's in a sports situation, in the that kind of thing. So as a practitioner, so the way I try to talk to my kids when I'm not caught up is that from that space of awareness, right? Like, wow, look at how we're all acting right now. Isn't this silly? I'm thinking this, and this, and it makes me not like you, and it makes me want to do this, and this, and that's not very nice, is it? So that's sort of
Right.
the way that, and so in a locker room, it'd be like, rather than berating people, right, or kind of the chant for we got to work harder and blah 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 blah. And I'm not discounting that because I know that's important, but again, can we start speaking in that just more observing space? I don't know if
Yeah.
any of that made sense, but
I think a ton of it makes sense. And if it doesn't start your wheels spinning, then you've already stopped listening, or continue the wheels spinning. It's amazing to hear all of these pieces and to fit in. And you talked about sort of like the wheel and being able to jump off, but still be able to pursue, and the
yeah,
six most dangerous words in sport when it comes to maybe mindfulness or like a new technique or prevention of injury or this, whatever it might be, is because it's always being done this way. It's a hard thing to break in sports, right? Like we can't do that because it's never been done that way. We go through this on a regular basis. We start looking at athletes now in the space that I'm working in with the people that I'm working with. And I'm really, really blessed and honored to be a part of that. We go through this and we look at like, why are we doing the things that we're doing in the training space? We have athletes in their off season where we have no alliance to their professional ownership, to their team that they play for, other than to report data or injuries and get them ready for what they need to be ready for. But when we go back through time and we look at why is every athlete right now squatting on angled baseboards instead of on the floor? And why is everybody Olympic deadlifting? Why is everybody doing Olympic lifts to get better at sport? Olympic lifts make you better at the sport of Olympic lifting, but there is no direct translation to being able to run faster, to jump higher, etc., and so on. So if we go back far enough through time, we find out that like we just started doing this. It seemed like a good idea. Somebody else thought it was a good idea. Then it was a really good idea. Yeah, it fell off a little bit there. And then somebody else picked it back up and they're really trendy. So they started doing it. And now LeBron James is doing it. So everybody should do that thing. And I think a piece of that is navigating that whole narrative and understanding that like we need to meet athletes where they are at, and how we do that is having them understand who they are first and foremost, and to be self-regulating advocates for themselves, and understanding that if that athlete isn't in that space, we can help coach from that end of things, as opposed to throwing more of that external, more weight on the bar, that'll get you better, more of this. Like, yes, to a degree, But I think the more understanding that athletes have, and we're talking physical, we're talking mental, we're talking interconnected mind and body, the more understanding that they have of themselves, the better off they are when they walk out the door into all of those relationships, into choosing to play or not play, into having the conversation with their psychotherapist, their special coach, their team's coach, their manager, the GM, their agent, whoever. They're better off because they understand who they are and what they, how they relate to themselves, right? And I think, so to come back around to the very first statement of sort of how do we talk and how do we meet athletes where they're at, we all have to be advocates for understanding that we're all suffering, right? And we're all going through things and we're all human, and all of these pieces are at the forefront and not in the background. Like this is, we need to meet an athlete. If you walk into the gym or into the therapy session and you're bagged or you're hungover or you're whatever you are, we know that the output of the session is going to be affected. If we don't modify that as the practitioner, we're hooped. We're not doing anybody any good. And so I think that's understanding, not to say that athletes are hungover, but I mean, whatever the case may be, if they're injured and they're not able, or they're not willing, or they're not mentally in the place where they can push themselves today, if I'm the one pushing them, I'm part of the problem. I'm not part of the solution. So I think looking at things that way and sort of finding a way to know who you're speaking with and know why you're doing what you're doing, and reflecting on that, like you touched on it, right? Like George Mumford, for those that are listening, The Mindful Athlete is an easy read. And I would encourage anybody to pick that up and go cover to cover with that thing and just simply read it and then reflect on that, because there are some pieces in there that are quite simple, quite straightforward. But again, it comes down to all the things that we talk about in the sports performance space. The hard part is consistency. The hard part is showing up every day. The hard part is getting educated. It's not the lift itself. It's not the rehab itself. It's the being able to stick to it, because we're, as humans, tempted naturally to the quick fix. How do I get there fastest? How do I do that, without having to spend the time doing it? Because I want to go do all those other things too. I don't know. It's a really interesting talk, and I don't know if we've answered any questions, and maybe asked more questions than we've answered. But beautiful stuff, and I love that piece of I am who I am, but I am also who you think I am in this moment. That's beautiful. Yeah.
I am who I think you think I am.
Yeah, I am who I think you think I am. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that's very much I think. And I don't know. There's so much that we can take on this, but listen, I also want to talk to the point off of that seminar we did in October, and I'm sort of driving that back because I think a lot of people can learn a lot of things from listening to you and listening to Jens, and CCMHS has also brought you on as a therapist external to their, right? Is it correct? The Canadian Center for Mental Health and Sport. Mike Stroh is our guest tonight, but the Canadian Center for Mental Health and Sport brought you on as a therapist. What a great center for athletes and coaches and practitioners in the space to have access to therapists. When you start working with athletes or talking about athletes, what changes for you as a practitioner? Or is it simply like, leave that at the door and I'm just going to deal with X?
Yeah, I think I'm working with someone right now who's an athlete, and not through there, but I think this part of this is my personality. I think it always has been, is just, I don't really care what you do and who you, like, where you roam and what's going on outside. Like, I always am trying to connect to the human being that's in front of me. I think that sort of has helped me in a lot of, I've been around, I guess, and worked with a lot of high profile people, not necessarily athletes, mostly musicians and entertainers. And I'd say one of the things that always helped or made me the person that was chosen to do that was because you're just another human being. So that piece is important, I think. I had to figure that out for myself too, like, who am I? So I think my own journey in discovering that and finding out that I'm just on, awareness, whatever. I don't want to get all sort of philosophical, but so when I meet with people, I always say my target market is the human soul. And so it's, I don't care what you're doing or what you've gone through. I'd say, so I meet people there. So if it's like I'm having a hard time performing right now, really it's not the performance that matters. It's all the things that happen in advance of the performance. So all right, the simple check boxes of, are you sleeping? Are you, are you living a quote unquote normal life? Are you using substances? Are you doing this? Are you fighting with your wife? Like, are you fighting with your kids? Are you, there's all kinds of those things that go on. And so my work always centers around that. Just let's identify with our awareness. And then once we identify with our awareness, and again, that's another attachment in some sense, but can we just start to notice that? And then everything else takes care of itself from there. In my opinion, I'd say it's a bit of a longer term game. It's not a, let's get you over your phobia of shooting free throws. There's a whole bunch of things that go on prior to that,
Yeah.
if those can be addressed, then the free throws won't be such a big deal.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I see it. I know, again, I'm not a sports psychologist per se, and I'd say maybe those people have more expertise with specific things. But going back to your theme often, and just how I approach human suffering, is it's not about the outside, it's about the inside. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you go, what you do. Let's get some clarity on, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What are my body sensations? And what are my behaviors? And how can I cultivate my ability to make different choices with the awareness of those things and how they influence me? So that's, I guess, my kind of runaround answer to that.
Yeah, no, but there's no runaround there. I keep coming back around to this in my own practice, my practice of awareness, my practice in meditation, my practice as one identity in my life as an athletic therapist, strength coach, yoga instructor, whatever you want to call it, working with other human beings. The simple things go the furthest, but they also take the longest. But those
Yeah.
are the foundations that we need to build from. And those are the things that we need to reinforce, because if you don't address a foundation, eventually over time, there's going to be a crack, a leak, and then the whole thing falls apart. And so we need to come back to those things. Look at breathing, eating, sleeping, relationships, how we're feeling, and behavior. Like, that's every realm of life. Like, these are the
Yeah.
things that if
Yeah.
if we need to have at least a grasp on a couple of those things, or some good questions to ask, or some great people to refer to, if we don't know how to ask those questions in the therapeutic space, in the sports space, right? Athletes struggling, athletes struggling, athletes struggling. We're not breaking through. We're not qualified to be a psychotherapist. We need somebody who is. We need to be able to identify those flags and get them to who they need to, in conjunction with the pieces that we're working on for recovery or rehab or training. I think those are absolutely critical. But those foundational pieces, again, are what it comes down to. It doesn't have to be flashy, and it really doesn't matter who's in front of you. And they can be 12 or they can be 27. Identifying those pieces, and we can apply that to movement or to rehab. We sometimes are guilty of that left brain and thinking of only the logical things. This is movement. This is how it has to be done. This is how I learned it. Therefore, this is how you have to do it. And if it doesn't look right, that's not right. And athletes and humans are all individual. And so I think as we approach them that way, our results, quote unquote results, are going to be a whole lot better in working with humans if we're allowing individualistic expression of said movement, lift, performance, so on and so forth. Maybe not as simple and straightforward, but
Yeah. Do most team, like, I have a friend who played in the NHL for a long, long time, and not all his teams had a sports psychologist, but some
yeah,
did.
yep.
And I just don't see how is that not a norm, or is it a norm, or it just doesn't make any sense to me how they're, well, I shouldn't say it doesn't make any sense to me, but if this whole big pictures is to move forward, that seems just like a very logical thing for teams to do. is
Yeah.
hire someone like that, have them around all the time. And
Yeah.
I just don't know how common that is.
I think it's fairly common in the higher levels where the resources are there. In the lower levels or sort of, junior ranks, I think they may have one, but it may be one that's sort of like, okay, you can call them, but they're never there on the occasion. The
Right.
other part of that is also similar to that first question you flip back to me, is like, if they're an employee of the team, regardless of the fact that they're a doctor, that they have a board of ethics, a code of ethics, and all these things that they have to follow, there's a bit of resistance with many athletes and friction, right? Because what I say and do in here could get back to management, could affect my playing status, could affect whatever the case may be. And I think that's a very real fear. I think that's something that we live on a regular basis in our lives, but in the pro space, the athletes, this is how they make their money, their living. This is how they do the things that they want to do. So I do think that we're making headway in that way. I would go a step further and to say, like, those in those spaces should also invest in somebody like that for
Mm.
their off season, for outside of the team, where they can have that sounding board of calling you and saying, hey, listen, like, I'm on the road right now, and only in sort of, obviously self-harm or thoughts of harming others would this get back to the team, so to
Right,
speak.
right, right. Yeah, yeah.
But having somebody that I can call and rely upon, again, I think that's about having resources and understanding that. So I'm almost of the mind that in the team space, maybe a third party that doesn't have any, that isn't a hire directly for the university or for the pro team. Maybe that's an option. And I think a lot of organizations sort of play with this and look at this and what is the best. But I don't know. Does that
No,
make
but
sense?
that's
We're just kind of talking it through. Does that make sense to you? I don't know how that plays.
100%. Yeah, yeah. And that's an example of somebody like me who's not immersed in the space. That's just
Right.
a lens that wouldn't come up. There isn't right at the top of mind for me, but 100%. That makes total sense. And how, yeah, maybe we're making progress on this, maybe we're not, but as a societal thing, to me, I have my own therapist, but I also have like a good friend who I got through my addiction recovery that is my therapist. Like he's so much for me. And that's the person that I have around always to, we can't, and I'll go back a bit to this idea of maybe it's left brain, right brain, I don't know, but our ego is so resistant to other, like to honesty in some sense. So why having relationships with other humans is so important is that relationships with other humans who have sincerely your best intentions in mind
Mm-hmm.
and who also practice these things themselves, is that we need that honest feedback and reflection. And that's why, again, for athletes, it's so hard because they've been pampered their whole lives and everyone's just, what do you need? What can I do? You're the boss. You're this great human, blah, 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 blah. And that, I know, ugh, I mean, maybe some athletes like that, but I would say most don't. And I don't know. That's probably a total assumption. But so anyway, we need another human being in our lives. And whether that's a therapist or not, I think a therapist, again, is just an identity, right? Or a label. It's just another human being who you go to for honest, hopefully wise discussions, right? And so,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's like a mind coach. You have a coach for everything else. Why not have one for your mind?
It's an amazing thing. I mean, we spend thousands of dollars on skating coaches and speed skating coaches and shooting coaches and pitching coaches and arm care specialists and equipment for this and analytics for that and all these pieces. And there's one that seemingly does get left off the board, and that is mind. And in the sporting space, again, and a generalization maybe, but like that's soft, you know, to like in a lot of athletes' verbiage, it's soft to go and talk to somebody, right? Like that takes away the armor that I'm supposed to be wearing all the time, and all these pieces. And in reality, I think it actually builds up that armor from the inside out. And it's an interesting discussion. I would love to take this to a room, you know, of athletes and say, like, where are you at on this? What would you think of this? And we do, like, we talk about in our space on, you know, who is responsible for that. And I think it's all of us, right? It's all of us combined, and finding the right mesh. And we know that personality plays a role as a therapist, as a strength coach, as a yoga instructor, as an athlete. I'm not going to get along with everybody, but I know that they're going to be in my space, or they're going to be providing care or providing a program, right? And you talk about athletes being pampered. I think the other side of that as well, and we can use pampered as everything handed, but we can also be everything pushed onto them. Here's your schedule, here's your this, here's your that. And those can be also crushing in terms of pampering in a different sense, right? Like those are heavy weights that I'm carrying all the time that everybody else is providing for me as well. I've talked to a number of athletes just coming out of COVID who didn't play their last season in university, and now they're entering the job world, and they're like, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with like no scheduled time to work out, no practice time, like nobody ringing the bell for me, right? And I think that's also a really tough transition out of sport into another role, another identity, if and when the time comes. And that's a whole different conversation that we could spend lots of time on as well. And I think maybe this just becomes a regular thing where we just come on and just talk about one issue or one thing, and we just keep going with this, because these are the conversations I think that us as practitioners, and I'll speak from sort of the therapy lens, the athletic therapy lens, where some of that expectation is on us to be that person, right? We have very little schooling in psychology, maybe a course in our undergrad. And yet we walk the tightrope of best interest of the athlete, but best interest of the organization, plus the scope of practice, plus not erring in our scope of practice and pushing too hard and somebody gets hurt, that's our fault, or not pushing enough and they don't get well enough soon enough. And so that tightrope line that therapists walk, very much sort of like the HR department of a large corporation, or like a psychotherapist. And so not like a psychotherapist in terms of the skill set and the training, obviously, that you've done and that people in the field do. So let me ask you a question specific to that. What would you advise therapists in terms of things that you should or could learn along the way outside of school? Are there courses? Are there basic things that you would recommend people who are dealing with other human beings in high stakes or advancing to high stakes environments? Where would you go with that?
Yeah, I'd say it's really important to understand. I mean, this, like, I feel like I'm on repeat, but I'm just understanding how your own mind works is helpful. What are the things that you have a hard time with? How do you, and this is why it's so important to have other people in your life that can help you see these things, because the ego at all costs will resist looking in the mirror. And so figuring out and having some sort of reflective habit for your own problems is really important. I just had this thought, and I have a little video with Gabor Mate where I get psychotherapy from him. It's on YouTube, and it might be something for people to watch. Maybe I can find it and put it in the chat. But it's 15 minutes. It's really good. It's a great example just of like how you can have a conversation with someone through an honest lens. And so that's the first part, is just like understanding your own experience. And then it's hard because without going into and learning like a therapeutic modality,
Right.
I don't really know exactly. I think listening is a good one. I think in all therapy, but the Socratic method, I think it's called. So just learning to ask questions in a sort of non-judgmental way, in a curious, open way is really helpful, um, especially around difficult topics. Wow, I don't know what that's like. Tell me a bit more about that. Or I wish I could understand, but I don't understand. And maybe you can help me understand. Or those type of more open-ended questions are really helpful. So maybe that's a big one. Open-ended versus closed. Although if it's very important, are you going to kill yourself? That's a yes or no kind of thing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
but so just learning how to ask questions in a way, and then also how do you listen without necessarily thinking you have to have an answer? Those are really important ones. And like always asking for validation, always asking for clarification, um, respecting boundaries. Like I know it's not specific. What could you go and learn to do? I mean, obviously, I think mindfulness is helpful, but you need a teacher. You do need a teacher. Like an app's not good enough, in my opinion,
Hmm.
unless you're someone who already has been taught relatively consistently over time. Um, Not to say that an app isn't helpful necessarily, but I do think you need a teacher or you need a community to practice with. Um,
And they're
so
out
those
there,
are
right?
kind of
Like
things.
those are
Yeah,
out there and they're readily
yeah,
available, which I think, I even in navigating into this space and navigating toe in the water into ankle deep and then just diving in, um, they're out there. They're out there, they're available, they're accessible, and just sort of dabbling in it to start and finding a community that supports you and you can be a support in as well. I think that's absolutely
yeah.
massive. You and I talked about MBSR and mindfulness based stress reduction and these programs, and some really good ones out there as well, available online through the pandemic. And a few physicians here in Ontario are covered through OHIP for MBSR programming. I just,
And
yeah,
more,
these
yeah.
are great points.
I
Yeah.
would say too, we run a meditation group quarterly usually. It starts again, it's free. It starts again on this Thursday, actually, 10 to 11 a.m. on Thursday mornings. It's running for the next 8 weeks. So I don't know, just, anybody
Yeah.
listening or on now, if you want to join us, I don't know what to say. Contact me. Mike
Yeah.
at startswithme.ca. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, there's usually 10 to 20 people on. It's good. It's a good crew of people.
Yeah, really powerful stuff to have that reinforcement and to be there and be vulnerable and also experience other people's experiences, whether
Yeah.
you're willing to share yours in the group or not. I think those are critical. It's the shared human experience that goes such a
Yeah.
long way. Um,
Yeah.
some amazing stuff. So that's Mike at startswithme.ca. The website is startswithme.ca. Mike Stroh is our guest again this evening. It's session 79 of Let's Chat. He is the founder of Starts With Me, the creator of the State of Mind Festival,
Mhm.
and the host of the State of Mind Mental Health podcast. Some brilliant things. Going back to the State of Mind Festival, are recordings available yet, or will they be available in the near future? Not to put you on the spot, but putting you on the spot.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a good
Soonish.
businessman. Yeah.
Okay.
No, they, for sure. I mean, they are available. I don't even know how to say that. There's nowhere where it clearly states that. For people that did attend, they got access to them, of course.
Right.
Um, but yeah, if you have interest in them and you go to stateofmindfestival.com and you seem interested in the speakers and all the stuff, then just fill out the contact form there and we will figure out how you can get access to them.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some great shares on that one specific to the athlete
Yeah,
space.
yeah,
Marcus
big time.
Connect and Matthew Arnone, Kareem South and Alex Town sharing specifics of their journeys and their path and mental health and the pursuit of excellence and the pursuit of self through sport and in sport and outside of sport as well as human beings. that participate and identify as athletes. I think this has been a really great chat, Mike, and I don't want to keep you too late. It's a Sunday night, and we'll move into the week here, but would love to do this again if you're up for this and keeping this sort of semi-regular. I'd love to have you on again and maybe even get into a little bit of a back and forth with a panel. I have some amazing people that would be great to sort of sit around a table and bat some ideas back and forth if and when you have some time.
For sure. I think what would be cool would be to do a case study, so to speak, on a particular person, situation, and environment, and just brainstorm on all the different things that may or may not be happening. I think, the athlete who got caught with the weed recently, it's a good example of, prior to the decision to smoke the joint or to do the violation that she knew she was doing, there's so many points along that pathway that led to that decision that perhaps could have been done differently, so that perhaps she would be going to the Olympics. And of course, yeah, whatever, we're free and we should be able to smoke weed and blah, 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 and do whatever we want. But at the same time, you're an athlete for a national team and you have some rules and regulations, and you agreed to follow those rules and regulations. So
Absolutely.
Anyway, yeah, that's another whole topic altogether that is important. And if she doesn't care, if it's like, I chose to get high and I'm okay with the consequences, then, we should leave her alone and just let her be on her way. But if she's, I don't know enough about it, but just in general, if people are aware of the consequences of their decisions and are willing to deal with those things, then we should kind of leave them alone, as long as they're not harming other people.
Right. Yeah. Listen, it's been an amazing chat for this evening. It's always amazing to connect with you, and I don't think I even said thank you at the beginning of this, but thank you for all of the
You
overlap
probably did.
and the opportunity that we've shared in the last sort of 12, 18 months since reconnecting. It's been a beacon of light, a lot of good stuff coming from it, and continuing to evolve through different practices, through the festival, and connecting some people who weren't connected before. This is what it's all about. And this is what this platform, again, for all the listeners out there and people picking up the podcast here, keep sharing this outward. And if this one rings home, reach out to Mike. It's mike@startswithme.ca. You can also reach out to Mike through myself if you so choose. Our new handle on Instagram, letschat.at, consult at firststartherapy.com, and some good things coming up on our side as well. Our next guest will go next Sunday night. It's Gabby Boulding. She was the 2021 CATA Research Writing Award recipient. We have a great host of guests coming up throughout July, including Aaron McElhanan, who we couldn't get last week, but we're trying to align schedules, head coach of UBC women's basketball. Mike, once again, thank you so much for sharing your time and for being here and all of the insight. I think I've made pages of notes. I know our listeners will always reach out, and our community is always looking for more, for growth in these areas where, going through school, not necessarily a focus, but certainly coming out of school and working with human beings, and this day and age, a growing focus for athletic therapists, chiropractors, physiotherapists, you name it, strength and conditioning coaches, other human beings working with human beings. Let's just put it that way. Really appreciate it, man. And I'll let you wrap this thing up, and that's all, man. Really, really, really just truly humbled to have you on, humbled to know you.
Yeah. Thank you, kind sir, for the kind words. And I love chatting about these things and always open to do so. I think the theme that often you bring up and that we discussed today is what are you underneath kind of the roles you play, and can you learn to relate to that in a way that's more conducive to your well-being, is sort of an important question. It's a journey, it's a lifelong practice, but I think that's where kind of protection against the inevitable suffering of life is found or is contained. And so I just encourage people to explore themselves, explore what's going on behind all these labels and identities. And I wish you all the best. And I need to get back to my own practice of that. So I'm not a soapbox, but anyway, thank you so much. And
Yeah,
anytime for sure. There'll be
Yes.
another time. Yeah.
Much appreciated. Session 79. Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast brought to you by First Start Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It truly does start with me. Find more. Good night.
So, bye.
See ya. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com. CONSULT@firststartherapy.com. On Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.